In the picturesque city of Linz, stretching along the banks of the Danube, there was a small café on the main square, frequented by both locals and tourists alike. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, yet everything moved at a hectic pace, especially for the poor waitress named Johanna. Johanna was a woman of almost overwhelming timidity who had somehow managed to find employment in this café despite her panic-stricken fear of guests. Johanna, with her shy demeanor and large, fearful eyes that constantly darted around, was a sight that amused and confused the guests in equal measure. Her fear reached immeasurable heights whenever someone wearing black shoes with white shoelaces entered the café. This peculiar sight triggered panic attacks in her that were unparalleled. No one knew exactly why this particular combination terrified her so much, but the effect was unmistakable. As soon as she saw the dreaded shoes, she would stiffen as if encountering a ghost, and her already pale cheeks would turn even paler, almost translucent. Her colleague Hansi, a young man with short blonde hair sticking out like bristles, was an equally nervous individual. Hansi, whose real name was Hans, but was called Hansi by everyone, could never stand still. His hands constantly trembled, and he always seemed to be searching for something he had lost. The two of them were an odd pair, Johanna and Hansi, but they shared a silent understanding in their mutual nervousness. The café's operation ran in chaotic paths, especially when guests with the dreaded shoes appeared. One day, when the sun was high in the sky and tourists flocked to the main square in droves, the inevitable happened. A man wearing those exact shoes entered the café. Johanna, who was just taking an order, froze. The cup in her hand began to shake and eventually fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The guests looked up, some laughing, others concerned, but Johanna stood petrified. Hansi, who was behind the counter, desperately trying to operate the coffee machine, noticed the situation and hurried over to Johanna. With a nervous glance at the man with the black shoes and white shoelaces, who had now sat down and was studying the menu, Hansi tried to calm Johanna. "Johanna, it's just a guest, he whispered, but his words seemed to have no effect. In her panic, Johanna decided to flee. She dashed out of the café and ran across the main square without paying attention to the traffic. She ran and ran until she finally reached the castle museum. There, amidst the historical artifacts, she found some peace. The cool, silent halls of the museum offered her a refuge, far from the hated shoes and frightening guests. Hansi, who didn't want to leave his colleague to her fate, followed her to the castle museum. He entered the quiet halls and eventually found Johanna standing in front of an old suit of armor, staring at it in fascination. "Johanna," he said gently, "you can't run away from your fears forever." Johanna slowly turned to him, and a look of relief was in her eyes. At that moment, both realized they had to do something. They decided to face her fear and return to the café together. From that day on, Hansi practiced serving with Johanna to imaginary guests wearing imaginary black shoes with white shoelaces until she finally overcame her panic. And so it happened that one day, when another guest with the dreaded shoes entered the café, Johanna calmly and collectedly took his order. Hansi, who was behind the counter watching her, couldn't suppress a proud smile. The guests who observed this scene applauded and cheered as Johanna served the coffee with a smile on her face. In the evening, when the café was closed, Johanna and Hansi sat on the terrace and looked over at the Pöstlingberg, whose silhouette was picturesquely outlined against the evening sky. "We did it," Johanna said softly, and Hansi nodded. In that moment, they knew they could overcome any challenge as long as they stuck together.